Okay, now I'm going to turn to the third chapter, and that's about the Pena Diary. And I want to make a couple of points about the Pena Diary. Just to remind you, De la Pena was a Mexican officer who was came to Santa Ana, came with Santa Ana into Texas during the Texas Rebellion, and he was disgusted. He was horrified by how cruel and inept Santa Ana turned out to be, and he was very, very angry at the loss of Texas, and he blamed Santa Ana. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to write an expose, which is what he did, about how Santa Ana had blown the Texas campaign and how Santa Ana was personally responsible for Mexico losing Texas. So the Pena Diary, there's a couple of things that to note about it. The first thing to note about the Pena Diary, it's not a diary. Okay, parts of it are a diary, parts of it are what he wrote at the time, but he worked on this manuscript for 3 years. Okay, so it's called the Pena Diary, but it's not your classic diary in any sense of the word. He worked on it for 3 years, and I guess to a certain extent, it's parts of it are a diary, but he kept reworking it because he wanted to expose to the Mexican people what Santa Ana had done because they had no idea. You know, there wasn't much news, right? And Santa Ana is able to cover it up. So, in this so-called Pena Diary, by the way, and it didn't get published for 100 years. All you had were the handwritten parts of it that Pena worked on until he died. He died around 1840. But the so-called Pena Diary wasn't published for nearly 100 years. And it caused a lot of controversy. It still causes controversy because in the Pena Diary, uh, Pena claims that Davy Crockett, the ex-congressman from Tennessee, was captured along with some of his men and executed the next day. One of the things that should be clear to you as you read this chapter, Pena doesn't care about Davy Crockett. He doesn't write this to destroy Davy Crockett's reputation. It's just something that he wrote about. It's something that he witnessed. But what's interesting is that historians, or at least some historians, it's really important to them, and not just historians, it's really important to them that Davy Crockett died the day of the Alamo. Now, as Chris talks about, this is really something new. As late as 1934, there was a book written called The Adventures of Davy Crockett, which has an image of Davy Crockett being in front of Santa Ana the next day, which is what Pena said would happen. Theodore Roosevelt wrote a history of the Texas Revolution where Crockett isn't killed the day of the Alamo. He's killed the next day. But during the Cold War, during the 1950s, you had a Davy Crockett craze. There were only like 3 TV channels at the time, and Davy Crockett just became this huge figure in American culture and iconography. And for a lot of Americans and for a lot of Texans, especially Anglo-Texans, it became very important that Davy Crockett somehow, that he died the day of the Alamo. Because the thing is, if he didn't die the day of the Alamo, if he was captured, what happened? Did he not fight? Did he hide somewhere? You don't want to look too deeply if he's captured the next day, if he's captured and executed the next day. And let's also make the point that Davy Crockett died a horrible death, no matter when he died. Okay, so who was Davy Crockett? He was arguably one of America's first celebrities. He was like the Kardashians of the time. He was famous for being famous. He was a frontiersman in a time where parts of the United States were becoming highly urban, and he played on that whole frontier character. He actually had a show in New York City where he played a frontiersman, and he had this kind of aw shucks demeanor. And Americans loved him for that. He served in the Congress, as did Sam Houston. But unlike Houston, Davy Crockett broke from Andrew Jackson. He didn't like Andrew Jackson. But like Sam Houston, why was Davy Crockett in Texas in 1836? He was just trying to make a new start. He'd been defeated when he ran for Congress, and he was trying for a new start. So what I would say about Davy Crockett is he just ended up in Texas at the wrong time. He ended up at the wrong time in the wrong place. He had no desire to come to Texas to get killed, but that's the way it worked out for him. Okay, so the Pena Diary talks about Davy Crockett. Let's talk about now, let's go back to the Texas Revolution and what's going on. Okay, so Sam Houston had persuaded the Texas Army to stop its stupid Matamoros expedition. Some of those men, about 400 that were heading towards Matamoros, they went to Goliad instead. They're going to be captured and executed in March, a couple of weeks after the Alamo. Others of those men joined Houston in East Texas, where he was trying to train the army. And still others were in San Antonio. Jim Bowie had, as I said in my previous podcast, Sam Houston had asked him to withdraw from San Antonio, but Jim Bowie decided not to do that. And so what happens is by mid-January 1836, Santa Anna is coming from the interior of Mexico. And if you look at this map that I'm going to send you a URL of, Santa Anna's army was divided in two parts. He's coming up into Texas with about 4,000 men, and he's coming from the Laredo Eagle Pass area. About 2,000 members of his army are coming into Texas from Matamoros under the command of General Urrea, U-R-R-E-A. So just to repeat, Santa Anna is coming to San Antonio across the Rio Grande from the Laredo Eagle Pass area with about 4,000 men. And his subordinate, General Urrea, who was the most effective Mexican general, he's coming into Texas via Matamoros. So Goliad is in his cross sights. So by mid-January 1836, the wheels of the Mexican army are moving, and Texas is being attacked from two places. One from the upper Rio Grande, Laredo Eagle Pass area, the other one from the Matamoros area. And Santa Anna, who's leading the larger attack, he has decided he needs a sensational victory, that he's very embarrassed and angered by the defeat of his brother-in-law, General Cos, which happened in the previous month in December. And he wants to go into San Antonio, even though San Antonio is not really strategically important, but he wants to avenge General Cos. Pena even talks in his diary that he heard Santa Anna talking about the time he had been in San Antonio in 1813. Santa Anna had been with Arredondo, and he wanted to basically do what Arredondo did. He wants to come in and wipe out San Antonio, wipe out the defenders in San Antonio. So what he does is he orders his attorney general, a guy by the name of Tornell, Tornel, to issue what's called the Tornell Decree, and I'll put this in an outline. And this Tornell Decree said that anybody fighting the Mexican army was declared an outlaw, was declared a land pirate. They're a pirate because they're trying to steal Mexican land. And that Santa Anna had a right to kill them. That anybody that was fighting the Mexican army under this Tornell Decree could be executed by Santa Anna. So that's what's going on there. Santa Anna is moving up into Texas, determined to kill everyone in his path, and he wants to make a big splash by recapturing San Antonio. Let's go back to San Antonio now. San Antonio, by late January 1836, it has about 4 different crews in San Antonio. One of these, if you want to think about it like that, one of these crews is led by William Barrett Travis. And he is the guy that's been assigned by the revolutionary Texas government, the consultation, to go to San Antonio and to beat off any attack by the Mexican army. Jim Bowie has a crew. He has a group of men that fight for him and that are more loyal to him than anyone else. And Jim Bowie and Travis hate each other. They don't get along at all. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of jealousy between the two, which isn't very good. The third crew is Davy Crockett's crew. It's a smaller one of Tennesseans that arrive in San Antonio in late January 1836. They arrive kind of at the wrong time. And Davy Crockett turns out to be kind of a mediator between Travis and Jim Bowie. Everybody respects Crockett. He's got a national reputation. And he once he gets to San Antonio, he works very vigorously to help the Texans against this attack from Santa Anna. Importantly, and this really fits into Chris' larger argument, the fourth group of Alamo defenders were Tejanos. And most of these Tejanos were friends of Juan Seguin. They had grown up with Juan Seguin. They were loyal to Juan Seguin. They were kind of Juan Seguin's men. And these are the Tejanos that end up fighting in the Alamo and being killed during the battle. Okay, so you have four different groups coming together in San Antonio. Travis, Bowie, Crockett, and the one that's most often forgotten, Seguin's men. Now, why doesn't Seguin get killed at the Alamo? The reason he doesn't get killed is Travis asks, after Santa Anna shows up in San Antonio, and he lays siege to the Alamo, Travis asks Seguin to leave the Alamo and to go down to Goliad and try to get the defenders of Goliad to come up to San Antonio to give Travis some help. And so that's why Seguin isn't at the Alamo. He gets at the Mexican siege of San Antonio is not airtight. Seguin disguises himself as just a civilian, and he escapes from the Alamo. He goes down to Goliad. He tries to convince the defenders there to come up to San Antonio. He fails, but that's why Seguin isn't killed at the Alamo. It wasn't like he was a coward or anything of the sort. He was doing exactly what Travis asked him to do, although he failed, not because of lack of effort, but just because the Texans at Goliad were very disorganized. Their leadership was pretty lame, and ultimately they refused to go to San Antonio to help relieve the defenders of the Alamo.